Hello Internet, I am L, and this is the IRL podcast. So I got in last night after taking the dog for a walk. I sat down and I opened Twitter. That was my first mistake. One of the first things I saw was an article about lesbians being pressured into having sex with trans women. That's bait, I thought. Don't click it. Of course, I clicked it, and that was my second mistake. Just from the opening sentence alone for this article, I was already pulling faces at my phone. The article reads, "I've had someone saying that they would rather kill me than Hitler. They said they would strangle me with a belt if they was ever in the same room as me and Hitler." This kind of rhetoric isn't that surprising to me. I've actually been on the receiving end of this position myself. Not because I'm a lesbian who is only attracted to biological females, but because I'm a straight man who is only attracted to biological females. This shit has actually been going on for a while. Now, I get it. I'm a straight white male. I'm supposed to be the enemy, and my opinion isn't worth anything, and many think I should just sit down and shut up. Well, fuck you. I have many gay friends, and they echo the sentiments that I'm going to be talking about today, and to be honest, I'm not going to censor myself just because it might upset a small percentage. If you want these kind of discussions, well, let's have them. I'm not going to get into too many details about the article because, quite frankly, it was sickening, and it makes me mad just thinking about it, to be honest. But the too long don't read version is that the people being interviewed in these articles were talking about how there's a bully culture within the LGBTQ community. This bully culture has led to lesbians actually blaming themselves for only being attracted to biological females. Think about that for a moment. They have convinced themselves that they were bigots. And so, in one example, one lesbian went on a date with a trans woman and it ended up in rape. There's a couple of cases like this in the article, as well as many comments on how people within the LGBTQ are either being bullied by their own kind for not going with the groupthink, or worse, and this is the one that gets me, telling themselves that they are the problem because they don't agree with the groupthink. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the LGBTQ supposed to be about the acceptance of people for who they are and not being judged because of someone's sexual preference? When exactly did that go out the window? I get that it must be hard for trans people to date. I mean, they are a minority within a minority, and options would be limited. And full disclosure here, I know this isn't all trans people. While digging a little deeper into this civil war that seems to be going on, I found plenty of trans people who spoke up and said they supported a person's right to choose, and their comments did have people calling them transphobic. I mean, trans people calling trans people transphobic. Welcome to 2021. To those who actually support a person's right to choose, well, I tippeth the hat. Good for you for standing up to the bullies. And to anyone who thinks they have some kind of moral high ground and so are justified with forcing their beliefs onto other people, well, you're the one with the problem. I even saw comments of people denying this happens and that people are just making this shit up so that they can attack the trans community, and that's a whole other issue that I might get into later. The thing is, I know this happens because it has happened to me. Years back, on my original Twitter account, I replied to an article which was about straight men not being straight if they didn't date trans women. The notifications lit up instantly, and people were calling me transphobic, homophobic, a Nazi, and yes, even comments equating me to Hitler, which, for the record, one killed millions of people. The other just isn't attracted to the idea of a guy's penis in his mouth. Please just stop using this argument. It just makes people sound like idiots. What did I say to get myself compared to Hitler? Well, I simply put, no, sorry, I am only attracted to biological females. That was literally it. That was enough to get days of what could only really be called harassment and some quite frankly nasty comments. People saying that I needed to kill myself and they were going to kill me and just all the usual stuff. Once again, I feel the need to acknowledge the fact that this isn't the trans community as a whole. While I actually never received any backup from another trans account, thanks for that, by the way, I do recognise that there is like this small tiny percent of the community that is actually this kind of toxic. And it is mainly online, which, let's be honest, people, everything online is more toxic. I had a second run-in with this toxic side of the trans community during the JK Rowling backlash, simply for supporting Rowling. I wasn't supporting her because I'm a Harry Potter fan. I mean, I honestly don't know my Gryffindors from my Huffle stuff, but I did agree with the tweet that seemed to trigger many people. It led to someone calling me a TERF, which was the first time I had come across this term, and I had to show my phone to my girlfriend and be like, babes, I've just been called a TERF online. What's a TERF? But then, the way Angelique explained it to me was that it's a traditional female who doesn't believe the trans community should be forcing themselves into certain female spaces. And well, to that I have to say I agree. So, yeah, whatever, I guess I'm a TERF. For those who don't remember, the tweet went like this. Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consulting adult who will have you. Live your best life in peace and security. But force a woman out of their job for stating that sex is real? Hashtag I stand with Maya. A lot of people seemed to miss the nuance of this argument, instantly getting emotional and taking it as a personal attack or anti-trans, despite the fact that Rowling clearly supports the idea of people being themselves. She was, however, referencing the case of Maya Foster, who had lost her job after trans activists had gotten her fired for tweets stating that men cannot change into women. The sex in this tweet, therefore, doesn't actually mean the act of having sex, but rather sex as in gender. The loaded gun here, then, is that the idea that man wants to be seen as female can never be seen as a female. And I'm going to get into that in just a bit. But that's not the argument here. The argument here is that women are having spaces that used to be safe no longer becoming safe. The idea that trans women should not be allowed into things like female toilets and female sports, and now I suppose we can add lesbians' beds to that. The issue is the idea that anyone can self-identify as the sex they want, and before I make the next comment, keep in mind I'm not aiming this at the trans community, but rather my own gender. I am throwing my own gender under the bus, which I actually rarely do because I love my lads. And oh dear, that's going to be taken the wrong way. I love being male and I like hanging with the lads. Let's leave it at that. But I feel I would be amiss if I didn't acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of creepy males out there, and there's a lot of them. But allowing people to self-identify as female, well, you are literally opening the door to the ladies' bathrooms and allowing a man who this is the point, may not actually be trans who is just saying he is trans to gain access, walk in and sexually abuse a female. Suddenly, female bathrooms don't feel safe for females anymore because of men. Do you get it now? Is it sinking in? Similarly, this concept of trans females being allowed to participate in female sports is one that I'm very, very much against. We are now literally cheering for a man beating up a woman, and we're calling it heroic. I'm not going to spend any time talking about like physical differences between the sexes, because if you're one of these people who deny such a thing even exists, then you are denying science, and I have no time for you. There is a reason biological women are never going to beat the male's deadlift record, and once again, you are opening the door for a male cage fighter who may just be getting his ass kicked in the male leagues, or, to throw on a wig, jump in the female cage and then dominate. And then, on top of that, they're going to be revered for it. Now, this isn't to say that trans people need to be excluded. In no way am I saying that at all. I'm just saying that perhaps they should have their own space, their own toilet, for example, and their own division. I mean, why can't we have trans males and trans females divisions in the actual Olympics? And I wonder how many trans athletes would still want to do this if they didn't get the competitive edge from it. And have you noticed how all one way this is? I mean, you don't get women wanting to join the male deadlift or the cage fighter divisions. You don't get women wanting to walk into the male toilets, although I don't blame them for that one. I mean, I remember I once walked into the ladies by accident at the cinema and noticed it had plants, and instantly thought to myself, well, this is too nice to be the blokes. I am clearly in the wrong place. Now we have men literally forcing their way into a lesbian's bed and then telling these women that they are the ones with the problem. They are the perverts for wanting a vagina instead of a penis. And since people have such attention spans, let me reiterate, this isn't an attack on trans people, but rather my gender as a whole. So, if I'm a TERF for believing this and wanting to keep the creeps out of certain female spaces, well then, TERF me up, buddy. Now, I have been careful up to this point not to step on any toes. But since we're here, I do want to bring up some complaints that I have specifically had with the trans and queer community of the LGBTQ. While I have just made the argument about men being creeps, which, let's be honest, they are, there is a toxic element of the trans and queer community that are doing a disservice to the community as a whole. I mean, just read the BBC article I've linked in sources and you'll get an idea of what I'm getting at. So right now, I'm going to issue a trigger warning. If you're one of these people that can't have a rational conversation debating real-world facts, or even just accept an opinion that may be contradictory to your own belief, the next part of the podcast is going to be very rough on you, because the gloves are coming off. The T in LGBT is supposed to stand for transsexual. But it's been perverted to the point where it no longer means what it was supposed to represent, and that is people with gender dysphoria. Despite recently being removed as a mental illness, gender dysphoria is a real problem for some people that can lead to a miserable and isolating life. I'm old enough to remember when LGBTQ+ was just LGB, and the T was added specifically to help people with this condition. I've read some stories which genuinely upset me of people who suffered because of gender dysphoria. Again, this is a real medical condition that can be medically diagnosed with an MRI brain scan. Despite what members of the trans community want you to believe about gender just being a concept, there is a visible chemical difference in how the male and female brains operate. I'll link a study in the sources, which I can't remember if it's from this year or last year, but it is very recent. And that basically did a brain scan on thousands of men and women, and as it turns out, yes, the sexes do react differently to different stimuli. This is why we say men are from Mars and women are from Venus, because as a straight male who has, dated a few women in his time, it's like they're from another fucking planet. And I know women will probably say the same about men. So people with genuine gender dysphoria will literally have the opposite sex's brain in their body. But this is a very small percent of the population, with the estimated figure being between 0.002% to 0.014%. And I'll provide a few sources for that. And again, this is important. This is a condition that can be scientifically proven. Meanwhile, the number of people who identify as being trans has shot up by over 3,000%. And this is specifically in the younger generations. This makes me once again draw issue with the idea of self-identifying with, whatever the hell you feel like, because, well, A, I kind of feel like it's damaging to the cause of people with actual gender dysphoria. B, again, you're opening the door for creepy people with anonymous intents to kind of hide behind it. And C, well, we've got to a point where people are now advocating for children to be put on life-altering drugs at an increasingly young age. And some people are pushing for kids to be able to do this without parental consent. This is not okay in my book. While admittedly, there is scientific proof to suggest that, using an MRI, we can detect gender dysphoria at a very young age. But that's not what's going on here. What's happening is kids are going into the doctor's office and saying, "Doctor, I think I'm a girl." And the doctor is just going, "Right, okay, well, here's some drugs that are going to fuck up your body for the rest of your life and potentially cause you problems in your adult life." I think we should be testing these kids before prescriptions are issued, because I genuinely think with most cases, you're going to go to the doctor and the doctor is just going to be like, "Well, your test results came back and turns out you're a poser." It has led to kids today creating all kinds of whimsical identities for themselves. I mean, be it people calling themselves a deer or a water sprite, or a demon. And I've seen a TikTok video where there was a biological woman who created a title for how she was attracted to biological men. We already have that, love. It's called being straight. But she did it. She created this title so that she could still be under the LGBT umbrella. I mean, speaking of TikTok, this is literally nightmare land for me. And not because it's a pedo's wet dream, which it is, and China is probably using it to spy on us, which they probably are, but because spending just 30 minutes on this platform, which is kind of like the home platform for the LGBT movement, it just makes me realise how far the LGBT community has strayed from its original purpose. It is no longer about fighting for equality, and it has simply became the game of labels. In my younger days, I was a hardcore liberal and a fierce supporter of the LGBT community. For example, when my sister wanted to adopt children with her partner, they had to jump through additional red tape that straight couple didn't have to deal with because they were gay. This is not okay, and I will fight in a corner of any cause like this where there is obvious inequality. With that said, nowadays supporting LGBT, and especially when you're adding that Q on the end, It means supporting some truly batshit crazy ideas which I just can't get behind, and especially when kids are brought into the conversation. This is what has led to the kind of older generation of lesbians and gays wanting to break away from the T's and the Q's, and they've created what is now called the LGBT Alliance. This is being labelled as a hate group by the trans community because they're getting left behind, but in my opinion, a lot of this has been brought on by themselves. More than one gay friend has told me that it has now become trendy to be part of the LGBTQ. Just like in my day, I guess it was trendy to be emo. And do you know how many of my emo friends are still emo? 0. Now, do you think these kids are still going to be identifying as deers and water sprites and demons or whatever when they're in their 30s or even mid-20s? Because, I will say this now, my emo friends thought they would be emo forever. It was their identity. It was just who they were. And despite the older generations telling them that it was a phase that they would grow out of, they just simply wouldn't accept that and believe it. Until they grew out of it. We all have that awkward phase growing up where we try to discover who we are as people, and I'm sorry, but it doesn't make you special. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I was a grebo. In the early 2000s in the UK, if anyone doesn't know, there was kind of like 2 social camps that you would usually fall into. You were either a townie that wore Adidas tracksuits and listened to garage music and hung outside the sports shop, or you was a grebo who listened to rock music, and we just fell into these camps because that's what everyone was doing at the time. I leaned to the grebo side of things, so, I grew my hair to shoulder length, I dyed it red and black, and exclusively wore dirty trainers and jeans with different bands' t-shirts. Then one day, and I actually can't remember how old I was when this happened, I think I was 24 or 25, but I was helping a friend set up for her house party and complaining about how it took me 45 minutes every day to sort out my hair. I was saying that basically I was going to have to leave 2 hours or so before the party actually started just so I could get ready. And my friend Holly suggested to me, well, why don't you just cut your hair? But my hair was kind of part of my identity. I had gotten the nickname Leesus because I had that long hair. Still, I did think about how nice it would be not having to wake up every morning and straighten it every day. And how nice it would be to go to this house party and not have people judge me and look at me as the immature grebo kid. So, I agreed to cut it off. And I didn't just go with like a short hairstyle, I went from one extreme to the other. I cut it all off. I buzz cut that shit down to the skull. And luckily, I liked it. And I've rocked that same look ever since because A, it's practical, and B, I've got the skull for it, so fuck you and your bald jokes. I'm not bald, I'm going to be clear, I'm not bald, I'm shaven. I'm going to hold on to that one for as long as I can because I don't think I've got many more years of use on that. The point is, the hair and the whole grebo thing was just an attempt for me to create an identity for myself. Cutting that hair off was a turning point in my life where I realised I didn't need to conform to this certain social group to be me. I was still Leesus, whether I had long hair or not, and to this day, there are people who still actually only know me as Leesus, and those people don't actually know I used to have long hair. I didn't even have to change my fashion sense that much. I mean, even now, you're most likely going to see me just wearing jeans and some kind of geeky t-shirt. My core ideals, my interests, my attitudes, and even my rebellious spirit, all of these all remained, and as it turned out, the thing I thought that defined me the most turned out to be the least important aspect of my personality. When I see these kids on TikTok telling me to use their demon pronouns, I can't help but see a younger version of myself in them. Like me, they have created an identity to try and stand out, and they have simply yet to learn that this identity is the least interesting thing about them, or at least it should be. And these kids are going to disagree with me now, I get that, but let's see if they are honestly still identifying as bloody a water sprite or whatever in 10 years down the road. But I honestly do think that things have gotten out of hand. I mean, the other day I caught a TikTok video where a woman was complaining because she was identifying as lesbian and she was being called out by the community because she was dating a gender fluid male or perhaps an asexual male, and the community was saying you're not really lesbian because you're dating a bloke. And she was complaining because people were using labels to label herself while using labels to describe her position. And it wasn't just lesbian, there was something else in there as well. But this is the insanity we've got to, and this is what has led to, well, one of the aspects, which has probably led to the LGBT alliance, and why the OGs don't want anything to do with the younger generation. It's becoming a label game to the point kids are complaining about being labelled as they use labels to try and give themselves an identity. It's so crazy to have to wrap your head around. I mean, the fact is, you can call yourself a water sprite, but it has nothing to do with being gay or even being a person with actual gender dysphoria. But it's all been thrown together under this one umbrella. And it's getting to the point where people are finding it hard to actually agree on something because the rules are just forever changing. And I'm not saying people can't label themselves as asexual or pansexual or demon or water sprite or whatever. I mean, the list goes on. But I would argue there's far more important aspects to you than what you identify as. And far, far more important topics that you should be concerning yourself with instead of these label games. Topics like overbearing governments, inflation, missing kids, and whatever, pick your poison. The world is a shit show right now. We have far more important considerations to deal with than your bloody pronouns, and I'm sorry, that's just a harsh fact of life. Now, to keep things moving along here, I do want to move on and get onto a topic that is really steaming my vegetables right now. Just keep in mind that when I do start talking about this next topic, I am not aiming my complaints at anyone particular, just rather at the community as a whole. A lot, but not all, I guess, of my complaints come down to how the LGBTQ+, and this is particularly the Q part of the community, are going after children. Now, the Q part is queer, and it's being used as a kind of catch-all category. But for the longest time, I used to say to a particular gay friend of mine who is red-pilled, that if the LGBTQ continue on the path it's heading, they're soon going to be fighting for the rights of paedophiles to love kids. At the time, my friend strongly disagreed with me, but over the last few years, he is starting to see some things that have been coming out in the name of LGBTQ+. And he is starting to understand what I'm getting at with this, to the point where he has completely abandoned the community himself. The first of these examples that I want to draw light to is the whole drag queen story hour thing. And I just want to take a moment to point out that being a drag queen is not the same thing as being trans. For like the umpteenth time on this podcast, gender dysphoria is a genuine infliction for some people, while drag is literally just a dude who gets his jollies from putting on a dress and putting on a performance, which in a lot of ways is harmful to someone with actual gender dysphoria. It kind of mitigates their plight, don't you think? So you can call me a transphobe for having a complaint with this, but I will counter with it doesn't actually apply here. This isn't about teaching tolerance of trans, but rather teaching tolerance of drag. These are two completely different concepts. And honestly, I wouldn't have such a problem with it if these drag queens weren't getting caught on video all the time, exposing their junk to kids and teaching them how to twerk. Twerking, if anyone still doesn't know, is a very sexual dance designed to get women to shake their ass for the benefit of the perverted male gaze. So why the hell are we teaching this to kids? And I'm going to dig up that video before I publish the episode, and I'll put the link in the sources before anyone tries to tell me that this stuff isn't happening. Because it is. My argument here is surely there must be a better way to teach kids about acceptance and not judging people without teaching them to twerk. I mean, I remember being a kid, and I actually remember seeing my first gay couple, and I asked my mum why two men were holding hands. She simply just looked at me and said, well, some people prefer to be in relationships with men and women and women. And I was like, oh, okay. Hey, what time is it? Batman's on soon. And, that is enough for kids. That's all that they need. This isn't like your everyday trans person talking to kids about being trans. I mean, it's like they pick the most flamboyant drag queen that they can find to purposefully piss people off and fan the flames of the social discord. And I do draw issue with it because kids are impressionable. When I was a kid, I wanted to work at the post office because my nan worked at the post office. After that, I wanted to be a Power Ranger. I mean, kids are fucking idiots. They don't know what they want. Let kids be kids. And if they get to their adult years and decide that the drag thing is for them, fine, whatever. Or, if they say that they want to be trans, that's fine, once they've got to an appropriate age. Each to their own. If you're an adult and you're not hurting anyone, and actually no, I'm going to add something on here that often gets overlooked. So, if you are not hurting anyone, and you are not hurting yourself, then you do you. This used to be actually a classical liberal view, but now I actually have to go to libertarianism for this kind of mentality. It's kind of strange. The point is, there are better ways to teach acceptance than Drag Queen Story Hour. And by exposing them to these flamboyant, again, very flamboyant drag queens, A, you're going to piss off a lot of parents, and B, well, you're going to get an increase in cases like Desmond is amazing. Runtime on this episode is already getting a little long here, so I don't really want to cover the full story of Desmond, so look it up. But personally, I find this case sickening. I mean, this kid has clearly been manipulated by his elders, and it's kind of sad. I mean, he's on video talking about doing drugs, and he's done strip shows for fully grown adult males. How is this right? How is this acceptable? I mean, if this is progression and this is the way we're heading, I want nothing to do with it. I mean, Mothership, please come and pick me up. These damn humans have lost the plot and I clearly don't belong here anymore. It is now being argued in academic circles that paedophilia is a mental condition, and this is how it starts. We've had TED Talks and academic essays explaining how it is both a mental disorder and a sexual identity. And I might actually do a follow-up blog post on this episode to expand on this idea, because we won't have time to get into it that deeply now, but it is happening. People are stating that paedophiles need to be understood and not judged. And again, this is where it all starts. And I've had this conversation, and I know most of the LGBT are going to say that they wouldn't support it and that I'm making it all up and this isn't really happening, but guys, this isn't going to happen overnight. It's a frog in the pan situation, and as much as people are going to resist this comparison, but it is the exact same thing as the gender dysphoria. LGB added the T to support people with gender dysphoria when it was a mental illness. Then, after a few years, the need to actually have gender dysphoria was removed. And any dude now, we've reached a point where any dude can just throw on a pink wig and do a little dance on TikTok to get a few likes and consider himself trans. It took a couple of decades to get from point A to point B. But here we are. Just because you wasn't old enough to remember how the T in the LGBT first come around doesn't mean that's not how it happened. That was how it happened. Trust me, I'm old. I'm getting to that point now where I don't like new music and I don't get the young'uns, and yes, I get it, alright? But I do remember, because having a sister that was in the LGB in the early days, I remember when the T thing was like all brought on, and it was resisted back then, but you know, it was said it was a mental disorder and they couldn't help it. So common decency in the LGBT community said, well, we should really help them out. So it was added. And now we're getting to the point where the LGBT is more about the whole T and Q side of things than it is the LGB. Hence the LGB Alliance. And again, it took about 20 years for that to happen. So it could take a couple more decades then to get people to go the same route with paedophiles. It will first be argued that it's a sexuality or a mental disorder and it can't be helped, which this is the stage we're at now. It will be said that the LGBT community need to bring them in and support them in the same way that they've supported other causes in the past. And then, 10 years later, it will then be called insulting to call it a mental disorder. And it will just become some dudes want to touch kids. Accept it, bigot. All of this is being done in the name of the LGBTQ. And again, I know people are going to say I'm crazy, but guys, I've got a sixth sense for this stuff. I actually call it my spider sense because I'm that type of nerd. But I do seem to have this intuition where I can see where things are heading. I mean, with that said, I never thought we would find ourselves in a position where we're having to defend lesbians who don't want to have sex with men. And make the worst part of that being that through in-community bullying, these women actually believe the problem is with them. That's how backwards things are right now. So I'm going to make this argument one final time. Rein in this small percent of very toxic people. Stop the bullying and coercion and just let, and I'm going to put this in bold for emphasis, let consulting adults sleep with whoever they want. It is not transphobic for a lesbian to want a vagina. I mean, that is the very definition of what a lesbian is. It's their sexual orientation. And it is not transphobic for me to want my partner to have a vagina that can biologically give me a child because I want to start a family. That is my personal preference. So with this, I stand in complete solidarity with my lesbian sisters. Vaginas are awesome, keep the dicks out. And for the love of God, people, that is a joke. Trans people are valid, and I get that they can date any consulting adult that they like. But they have to respect that not everyone is going to want to date a trans person. It's going to suck for you, I get it, but it's just a harsh reality of life. Do not push your beliefs onto others, in the same way that you would just get upset if a Christian was trying to push their beliefs onto you. Now, this episode has dragged on, and I apologise, but before I wrap things up, I want to step away from the actual LGBT side of things, and I actually just kind of want to take this opportunity to touch on the idea of the masculine versus the feminine. I have a way of looking at these concepts which, honestly, I think may be helpful for people if they apply it to their dating lives. I think people need to remind themselves that the masculine versus feminine is just a part of nature. It's kind of like the yin and yang, two opposing forces that live complementary of one another. And then continuing on from that idea, if you think of like the white dot in the black bit and the black dot in the white bit, the masculine can have a bit of the feminine in it, and the feminine can have a bit of the masculine in it. It's just that one force is always more dominant. Actually, I didn't think about this when I put this bullet point down on here, but the trans community could use this as a counter for my own argument earlier about gender dysphoria and self-identifying as trans. But I would argue it's still kind of a separate issue. I have noticed so many of our younger generation though, and this is specifically in men, they are ruled by their female energy, which has turned them into these emotional little shitbags. But you know what, I'm going off on a tangent here within a tangent, so let me get back on track. That's probably another topic for another day. This isn't actually anything to do with gender per se, but the majority of the time, yeah. Okay, you will see men have more masculine energy and women will have more feminine energy. But it does sometimes go the other way, with men having more female energy and females having more masculine energy. And like I was saying, I mean, the younger generation in males seem to be... No, I'm not going to go down there. Back up. Sorry. The point is, we do see this in homosexual relationships as well. In the gay community, though, it's just called being a top or a bottom. When it comes to relationships, the male energy tends to be the more logical and dominant. It wants to feel needed and accepted, while female energy tends to be more emotional and submissive and looks for support and just wants to be cherished. Regardless whether we're talking about like a hetero or a homo relationship here, the best kind of relationships are born when a male force meets a female force. In a relationship with two male energies, you're going to get two competing forces that are very dominant and both are fighting to be that dominant position. It just leads to a lot of very bad fighting and bickering, like, the fiery kind of arguments you see. Female and female relationships are kind of interesting because they can seem to be great at first. I mean, both seem to support each other, but you've got these two emotional forces at odds with each other where they're wishing one of the other sides would just take charge and make the decisions. And when an argument does arise, this leads to an emotional battle, and this too can get into like some very fierce kind of fighting and bickering. So then naturally, a male force and a female force create a natural fit. As an example, and I can only talk from a male force perspective here, but imagine a situation where the female force has become emotional and is seemingly crying over nothing, or something that the male force regards as unimportant. And yeah, I've been in this position many a time during my dating life. The male force has two options, and that is to either tell the female force to snap out of it and be more logical like the male force is, or the best option, it can say, "Okay babe, I don't get it, but come here and we'll hug out the boohoos." The female force here will feel supported and the male force will feel needed. I'm hoping with this, this concept is going to start sinking in right now for people. And this is the best relationship advice I can give, is figuring out what force you have inside of you. And you can figure out quite easily by understanding your needs and what it is you want out of the relationship. Then it just becomes a matter of finding the opposing force. If you're in a relationship where you seem to be getting into a lot of fights, take pause and consider, are these arguments coming from an emotional place? Are you dating someone with female energy? Or is the fighting about dominance, and are you trying to dominate each other? through this, you can actually sniff out some compatibility issues, if you're thinking in this way. Once in a relationship, remind yourself what role you play, and then play it. If you're a male energy, protect your female energy with your life, help guide it and care for it. If you're a female energy, then let the male energy help you and love you, and always remind your male energy that it is needed, appreciated, and loved. Understand this, and you will always get healthy relationships. Okay, perhaps not perfect ones, but I guarantee it will be a much stronger relationship in the long run. Another way I look at it is like this. The male force is, look at it like this. Okay, so the male force is a dog, and the female force is a cat. Pat a dog's head, and that dog is going to wag its tail, follow you around, and love you. The dog needs attention, and it likes to feel like it's needed. If you do not give the dog the love and attention that it needs, it's going to go away and find a female force that will give it that attention. And of course, you can get the wrong type of dog altogether that's going to wag its tail for any female force that comes along and pats its head. Meanwhile, you try to force attention from a cat. Have you ever tried that? You are going to get your eyes scratched out. Instead, if you sit down and ignore it, eventually, the cat's going to get curious and come to you. If you make that cat feel special and protected and looked after, well, Kitty's going to purr for you. Anyway, I have gone off on a huge tangent with that, so I'm going to wrap things up for this week. Follow, share on social media, yada yada yada. Visit irlpodcast.com for all past and future episodes, as well as my social links. And until next week, Internet, thanks for listening.